Welcome along to this video on who could replace Lewis Hamilton at Mercedes. If you're interested in what my thoughts are, then definitely keep watching. For those of you new to my channel, my name is Martin and I started racing when I was 12. In the sim world, I've raced and beaten some of the best drivers in Australia. I worked as a driver and performance engineer in Formula 3 and I developed my own race strategy simulation software for Formula 1. I raced in KZ2 at the highest level and got pole position in my first ever race. I specialize in the open formula category and now have my own course and website where I can share my 20 plus years of driving experience with you, which I'll put a link to in the description below. In this video, we're going to discuss who could potentially replace Lewis Hamilton at Mercedes. And of all of those who potentially could replace him, who should, what would be the pros and cons for each, and who do I think should replace him? So I've got a list of a bunch of drivers here who are potential options. So let's just run through them at high level. So we've got Carlos Sainz, Fernando Alonso, Alex Albon, Daniel Ricciardo, Esteban Ocon, Kimi Antonelli, who's currently in F2, Mick Schumacher, Sebastian Vettel, Valtteri Bottas, and Sergio Perez. Now, there could even be more than that I'm not capturing, maybe some Formula E drivers, maybe someone in Haas, I'm not sure. There could be more than that. Mercedes essentially have choice here when it comes down to it. Now, the key for me in the whole thing is that you're losing Lewis Hamilton. You are losing a massive hole in like the sport, in the team. That place and those shoes to fill are exceptionally big. So that's the context for the whole thing. So for me, at least, that means that I probably wouldn't put a rookie in. That's one of the reasons. And the second reason is you see Red Bull do this as well. They put rookies in big seats and then it's like a sink or swim situation. And it can kind of ruin your career. You just have to look at maybe Alex in a way as well. I think, and what I'm referring to there, sorry, is Alex Albon, who went to Red Bull a little bit early, sink or swim situation, struggled, came back to Toro Rosso and so on. I think what Mercedes did with George was the right way to do it. They were not in a rush. 3 years at Williams. He was always kind of in the pipeline to come to Mercedes. He did his learning. He did his mistakes there. Remember, he crashed into Valtteri. That was really good management to give him 3 years there and then promote him to the Mercedes team where it's not a sink or swim situation. You know, you've got that experience, you move into that role and that team and you're going to move forward naturally. So I think that's a potential, like if they were going to put someone like Kimi Antonelli in or probably if they were going to put Kimi Antonelli in straight away, that's a sink or swim situation. It's just not good for someone like that. The drivers need time in other teams. Like Max had his time at Toro Rosso. Daniel had his time at Toro Rosso. Fernando started in Minardi. Like it's not a bad thing for these drivers to start in a small spot. So the first thing is it's a big hole, and which means you've got to put a big person in. That's at least my opinion. And the second thing is you don't want to put someone in a sink or swim situation. So they're the two kind of criteria that I'm basing the whole thing on. So let's go through this one by one. So Carlos Sainz was the driver I mentioned first. Now, Carlos is a good driver. I think he's come a long way. He had a difficult 22. He's shown that he can match Leclerc or keep up with Leclerc in qualifying. He's a good driver. I just personally don't think he's the right fit for Mercedes in the context of they've lost a 7 times world champion and arguably the greatest of all time. Is Carlos Sainz the right person to replace Lewis? I just don't think that's, whilst it's a strong team, Carlos George, I just don't think it's strong enough. You got to remember, you're going to be dealing with Max Verstappen in a Red Bull. That's world champion team and quality. You're going to be dealing with Lewis Hamilton in a Ferrari. That's world champion team driver quality as well. You've got to look at that Mercedes and say, we need that experience. We need someone of significant experience and strength. And that's not to take away from George. I think he's amazing. He's doing amazing. He's got great race pace. He's mature. He's smart. He's knowledgeable. He integrates well with the team. not to take away from George, but he is not of world championship stature currently. So the next person on my list is Fernando Alonso. I personally would not hesitate in putting Fernando in that car. The reason being that, like I said, Lewis has left a big hole, world championship hole, and I would fill that with Fernando. It would be an opportunity for George to learn off Fernando. We know that Mercedes are heavily invested in George. Why not let him absorb some of Fernando's knowledge, and then Fernando can retire or move on or whatever thereafter? So that's one of the reasons. The second reason is Fernando's earned another opportunity in a top team. We know what happened in 2007 with McLaren. He had a perception of being a team breaker. And whilst there could be some truth to that, I'm not totally sure that it's entirely accurate. And he's earned his time back at a top team. He's done his Alpine years. He's done his Aston Martin years. He's done his Renault years. He's done his Ferrari years. He's gone up. He's come back down and he's moved his way back up. And Fernando's, it's just a shame to see Fernando fighting for 8th, 10th in an Aston Martin, in an Alpine or whatever. Fernando's earned his time. Now, not only has he earned it, he's learnt from that experience as well. He's learnt from what happened at McLaren. He's learnt to not rock the boat. He's got experience at Ferrari. He's dealt with the frustrations there at Ferrari. I think Fernando's the perfect person to put in that car. And your Kimi Antonellis can wait. They're young. They don't need to go straight into a top car. They can wait. They can get experience and they can do like a George Russell approach with someone like that. Stick him in another car for a few years, whatever. When Fernando moves on, bang, Kimi, George, you've got all that knowledge with George being next to Fernando and so on. Like I said before, you've got to fight fire with fire. You're fighting Max in a Red Bull, Lewis in a Ferrari, and Fernando in the Mercedes. That's how I'd set it up. That would be my choice. Alex Albon is next on the list. Alex is an interesting one because I feel like he was a victim of the sink or swim situation that Red Bull put him in. As I understand, he had 6 months or half a season in, Toro Rosso, and then was promoted up, and then sink or swim situation. And, not to take away from Alex, but that's just a tough seat. To put someone in that seat next to Max, to have to deliver, it's just not straightforward. So I think he learnt a lot in that experience, and he could well be adequate and sufficient to move into that Mercedes seat now. But everyone's just going to remember what happened at Red Bull, that it was a struggle and so on. Even though he's doing an amazing job at Williams now, everyone's just going to remember you're good, but when you had the opportunity, you weren't that good. Like I'm thinking about Austria here, where he had the favorable strategy and opportunity to win that race, and he didn't. And I'm not taking away from Alex. I think he's a great driver, but it's just he was put in that situation now, and it's just really hard to recover from. I would not put him in over Fernando Alonso. That would be clear. So whilst all these drivers are good enough, right? I've mentioned Carlos. I said he was good. Alonso's good. Albon's good. Ricciardo's good. Ocon's good. All these drivers are good enough, but you've got to make a call. You've got to make a split here. And I'm saying I'd take Fernando over Alex Albon. And they've still got him, he can stay at Williams. If Fernando moves on, you can always put Alex in, and then Kimi, Antonelli in there, so you can always bring them up eventually. It doesn't have to happen right now. Fernando is what has to happen right now. The guy's 40 or 41 or 42 or whatever. So that's why I would do that. Now, Daniel Ricciardo is next on my list. Again, I don't think he's the ideal candidate. The thing with Daniel, I think, is oozes of natural talent and oozes of hard work as well. I'm sure Daniel is a hard worker, but I don't think he's that knowledgeable or intellectual when it comes to digging himself out of difficult situations. Now, I am going to be slightly critical here, but we're separating the world's best drivers here. So, whilst I said before they're all exceptionally good, Daniel included, there's going to be some differences between them that I have to highlight. So I think Daniel's great natural talent, fantastic personality, integrates well with the team. Like he does so many things well. I just think at McLaren, there was an opportunity to show the world that he could dig himself out of a situation and turn it around and start hammering Lando. And that didn't happen. So why was that? Lack of understanding, lack of knowledge? I don't think it was lack of hard work. I don't think that's Daniel. It was just lack of understanding, lack of knowledge, lack of problem solving, lack of critical thinking. It's all of that. How do I get myself out of this situation? What's happening with this car? What does it like? What does it not like? What am I doing that it doesn't like? What is Lando doing that I could maybe try to implement? So there was that. Now, if you're going to put him in a Mercedes World Championship winning car, it's either going to suit him naturally or not suit him naturally. And we know that if it doesn't suit him naturally, it's going to be a struggle with Daniel. We've seen that. So that's the only thing that Daniel could potentially, have. Esteban Ocon is the next one. Again, fantastic driver. I haven't seen Esteban do much wrong. Like, he's always been good, competing with his teammates and so on. There is no reason that I can see to not put him in, other than the fact that I'd put Fernando in first. So I don't have much to say really about Esteban. I think he would do a good job and he would be a great fit. Whether or not he'd get along super well with George, like, I think Fernando George would be a much nicer dynamic, because there's that master apprentice kind of thing, and I think it would get along better. Whereas Ocon and George might clash a little bit sometimes, because Ocon's good and he's strong, and yeah. From the point of view of designing the car, it'd be helpful because you've got two tall drivers now, so you don't need to compromise between having Fernando a bit shorter and George a bit taller, or Lewis shorter, or whatever. I think having two tall drivers, at least you know what you're going to get now, and you can really optimize the car design for that height of driver, which could help as well. Again, I wouldn't put it in front of Fernando. Kimi Antonelli is the next one on my list. Now, a lot of talk about Kimi. I think it's way too early. He hasn't even done F2 yet, so we have no idea if he's even that good or going to win. Sure, he's good, but... And also, to put these drivers under that much pressure and in a sink or swim situation does a disservice to the driver. To put Kimi into that seat, like, if I can explain to you what that means, to put Kimi into that seat is a disservice to Kimi. Because if it doesn't work out, then we look at him the same way I look at Alex and say, oh, when you had the chance, it didn't work out. Do you know what I mean? It's not good. Kimi Antonelli, I'd put him in. I'd have provisions for him to go to Williams, with eventual provisions to go to the Mercedes team. I would keep him under Mercedes management, keep him, on your terms on a contract. If Fernando moves on, again, you've got the pick of the grid, whatever, then you can potentially bring Kimi in. It's all good. That's how I would deal with Kimi, assuming that he is as good as we think he is. Mick Schumacher is the next on my list. I think this is a straightforward one. It's just probably a no. There was a lot of mistakes at Haas. I think there's a lot of work to do for Mick. It's going to be very hard for him to come into a top team or back into Formula One at all, let alone into a top team. I think with Mick, if he could find a seat somewhere at Haas, if Kevin retired or Nico Hulkenberg retired, maybe would be an option to give him a second chance there. I can't see it happening that he'll move into a top team above Fernando Alonso. It's not going to happen. Sebastian Vettel is next on my list. Again, I don't see why you do this and not Fernando. Arguably, they're just as good as each other. They're both world champions. I like the idea of bringing an experienced world champion in alongside George, obviously, because I would like to put Fernando in. But I just think with a year off or 2 years or however long it's been, with multiple years off, and like, why would you do that when Fernando's in the car? He's ready, he's fit, he's determined. He's like, there's more. Fernando will give you more value than pulling in Sebastian Vettel off the bench. So that's a no for me. Valtteri Bottas was next on my list. I just think you know what you're going to get with Valtteri, and it's not going to be world championship quality, which you need. You're going to be fighting Lewis in a Ferrari, Max in a Red Bull. I don't think Valtteri is the person. I don't think that we should put George, like, put the pressure on him and say, okay, you're now the world championship contender and leader in this team. I think he's still, like, whilst George is great, he can still learn off someone like Fernando or Sebastian. So that's why I'd put Fernando in, and to elevate George and then put Valtteri under him, I think does a disservice to both of them. George has got to deal with that pressure. and he can't potentially learn that much off Valtteri, whereas I think he would learn stacks off Fernando. So it would be a good investment for Mercedes in George to put Fernando in. Sergio Perez is the next one on my list. And, kind of goes without saying, again, similar to Bottas, like they're experienced and, they might be helpful in the whole team, but really, what you're going to get. And it's not going to be like a firepower. You're not playing a big card to put Checo in. And you've lost Hamilton. So you've lost Hamilton to bring a Checo in or a Bottas in. I just don't think it's the right move. I think Fernando's the right move on a short-term deal. See what happens. You're not going to lose George. You're not going to upset George. It's going to be a strong team. And I would move forward with that. And I'd plant all of the other seeds. I'd give Ocon a bit more time. I would give Albon a bit more time and Kimi Antonelli a bit more time. And I would go from there. The only other person other than Fernando that potentially strikes me as a good option is Carlos. But I still put Alonso ahead of Carlos because he's got World Championship experience, World Championship quality. I just think he's better as a driver and he's quicker as well. So yeah, that's my summary. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you agree or disagree, who would you put in the Mercedes to fill Lewis Hamilton's shoes in 2025? Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.